Welcome to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger. At Press Coverage, I'm looking to bring on the sharpest guests, and I'm looking to help you find the edges you need to win in fantasy football. Today, I'm joined by Alfredo Brown of Football Guys. We're going to talk about the top 10 players to watch for fantasy football at the NFL Combine. So they're going to do all the other positions, but we are most focused on the big four positions for fantasy football. The NFL does us a real favor, Alfredo. We've got quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers all testing on the same day. They couldn't have just thrown tight ends in there, made it super easy. But we have 3 in one day, which I always love. How hyped do you get for the NFL Combine?
Man, every year there's always someone saying, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And then it inevitably matters. And I know that when these guys go and test, it doesn't change how good they are on the field, but it's absolutely going to adjust their draft stock. And so we're going to see guys that, hey, maybe you thought he was going to go early third. All of a sudden he's sneaking into early second. And there's teams talking about a guy that may be going late first. And all of a sudden they go out there, they jump out of the gym, they run a 4.3, they look great in drills. It changes everything. So the combine absolutely matters. I still love the combine, man. I've been watching it since as long as I've been watching football and enjoying the draft. As a Dolphins fan, that's all we have to look forward to every single year is the draft and the combine. That's our Super Bowl, baby. Draft day.
Yeah, you guys are a weird pick this year. The Miami Dolphins are one of those teams that, like, in NFL mock drafts, people are sort of all over the place of which way are they going. Potentially, it's a fantasy-friendly landing spot, though, because I think Miami might be in the mix for maybe one of those tight ends. Despite Jonnu being terrific this year, it's kind of in the wheelhouse where the Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland might end up being a real value. Remains to be seen, though. But NFL Combine, I love it. You bring up just how we don't want to make it a big thing, but it's a huge thing, especially for us in fantasy football. It can actually get us in trouble at times where a guy is so good athletic testing that we're willing to sort of not necessarily throw research and stuff that we've been looking at for months and months, but certainly guys catch our eyes with the incredible athletic traits. And it matters for NFL teams as well, maybe more so than it should. But like 2 years ago, Anthony Richardson lit the combine on fire. Incredible testing. That was one of those like sit up in your seat if you're a fantasy manager type moments. Last year, the Xavier Worthy 40. And if we look at just the athletic testing numbers for guys like Ricky Pearsall, guys like Xavier Legette, those help those guys get into the back end of the first round as well. So NFL teams, fantasy-wise, we can kind of run from it, but it's here, and we're going to really, really enjoy it. How excited are you about this class in general, Alfredo, from a fantasy football perspective?
Yeah, I think every year it's very similar to the combine. People tell you, oh, it's a bad class. It's a bad class. And it's just, no, there's always good players in this. And it's just about finding where they are. And so much of this is going to depend on where these guys end up in the draft. There's going to be maybe someone that's like my running back 10 or 12 in my rankings, but they end up in a really good spot on a good team, good offense. They get a little bit earlier draft capital than I thought. And I'm going to say, man, I got to probably draft this guy a little bit earlier, push him up my rankings. So I am excited about this class. I mean, if I think it was one of our colleagues in the industry, Derek Brown, who said, like, if this isn't an elite running back and tight end class, like, show me what is, because it's so damn good. It's so good. It's a deep class at running back. It's a deep class at tight end. There's some of these guys that are like the 5th tight end are potentially guys that would be tight end 1 in most draft classes. So we're getting a little spoiled. I know this isn't as good as last year, but it's still a very good rookie class, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and I think we sort of let quarterback influence the overall class quality a little bit too much, where years where there's exceptional quality at the quarterback position, people are going to look at it as sort of a better class. This year, I do think we'll end up with 3 quarterbacks drafted inside of the top 15. Where are you at? Just not to get too quarterbacky, but Jackson Dart, where do you see him drafted? Do you have a range in the first round where you think he could end up?
Okay, I was going to ask you. I was like, who do you have going top 15?
Jackson
This is
Dart.
juicy, Theo. Okay.
Jackson Dart, top 15.
Okay, I can see the potential with Jackson Dart. I'm not there yet with him. I think if someone takes him in the first round, it's one of these teams like a Pittsburgh Steelers or someone who it's like a little bit later in the first that they say we've got an ecosystem around him. That's what he needs. He's going to need an ecosystem. He does have the tools that he can sling it. But my guy, one of my friends, Jagger May, loves to say when quarterbacks are orchids. And that's kind of what Jackson Dart is. We got a lot of orchids in this class. quarterbacks that can thrive in a perfect environment. You put the weapons around them, you put the offensive line in front of them, they're going to be good. Jackson Dart is one of those guys. I think he can do it. I'm not in love with him. I'm not sold on him in top 15 or even first round, but I do think it's possible.
Yeah, he's definitely polarizing in the community. I just think it's a scarcity at the position. There's so many teams that could be in the mix for a quarterback. You bring up these teams that are sort of in quarterback purgatory. He's going to be appealing to them. It's a very shallow free agent class, not necessarily a wide open market for a potential trade. You're starting to see some of the old guys rumored for landing spots. That's always a sign to me that teams might embrace a quarterback. And we saw it last year where Michael Penix, Bo Nix were both projected to be by Vegas, not necessarily by Alfredo and I. They were projected to be like 29, 30 in NFL draft projections. And they end up going exceedingly higher. Penix goes inside the top 10, Nix inside the top 15. So for me, teams really need that franchise signal caller. There's no better advantage you have salary cap wise than a quarterback on a rookie contract. And I think that's going to sort of influence teams into taking that dive into Jackson Dart, who's got enough to him that you can kind of squint and see an NFL prospect. And there's some people that are on him as a quality prospect as well. So it remains to be seen. We will follow this one up. One question that not on a show sheet for you, but I've been asking everyone this question. We've had a rookie wide receiver, at least one, in 4 out of the last 5 years, finish as a top 6 scorer at the wide receiver position in PPR formats. Last year we had 2, and we could have had 3 if Vlad McConkey had another smash game or 2. So rookies have been scoring exceedingly well every single year, impacting us in fantasy right away. If there is a wide receiver in this class to give us a top 6 PPR season, which player is it, and on which landing spot, Alfredo?
Oh, that's an awesome question.
So
That's
good.
An awesome
So
question. Okay, so I will say, like, I love Luther Burden, and I think that if he ends up in a spot where he's going to get the targets, it's going to be great. I keep putting these two together, and it's Emeka Egbuka going to the Houston Texans and playing that slot role. It's Stephon Diggs started to play for them this year, and Diggs is going to be a free agent. Tank Dell is recovering from his injury. We already know that Nico Collins is the guy there in Houston, but you get CJ Stroud back with his former Ohio State teammate Emeka Egbuka, who I think he's one of these power slots that we're going to hear so much about in this class. This class has a lot of guys that are really good at this one thing. He's very, very good at it, and he's going to be a top 25 pick in the NFL draft, and I think he's perfect right there as a fit in Houston. He goes there. I think that he's going to be a good fantasy football receiver for us. Maybe not, the same thing that we've had this past year with like Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, but I think he's very good for you.
Emeka Egbuka is one we could have easily talked about because there's not a whole lot of steam with how he's going to perform at the combine athletically, but Egbuka is very good with the ball in his hands. I actually love that answer. I haven't had that answer, but if you start projecting him into the Diggs role without Tank Dell on the field, where it's you already have Nico Collins, getting a great deal of attention from defenses on a week in, week out basis. Diggs was over 15 points per game this year, quietly in that like low ADOT role. If we can expand that role a bit, that could be a really fantasy friendly one. And the tight end production declined significantly this year with Dalton Schultz. So you've got an offense where it could be a very condensed target tree. Egbuka could get 120 targets out the gate in that situation, and a quarterback with familiarity. So I think that's a great answer to a phenomenal question. Let's take a quick break, and we come back. Alfredo and I are going to talk about the top 10 players to watch for fantasy football at the NFL Combine, as well as a few others who might make a big impact in Indianapolis.
Rookie. It's all about rookie talk in fantasy football right now. So why not go use all that knowledge to do something other than a mock draft? Chris Jimino won $8,000 with just 2 teams last year, and each draft took 5 minutes. That's pretty good ROI. You can start doing rookie drafts for money today on FastDraft. The Origins tournament is live. It is the place to go and monetize your knowledge of rookies and use your favorite player profiler host promo code for a $25 deposit match. Now let's go start drafting faster.
Welcome back to Press Coverage. Theo Gremminger with Alfredo Brown of Football Guys. Interesting stuff with the NFL Combine. Is there a drill that sort of gets you going? Is there anything besides the 40-yard dash for you that you really love watching?
Oh man. I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but I love the kind of like the bag drill they have the running backs doing, where they'll have a running back coach that's holding it and he'll push to one direction, and it's about the running back being able to read, react, sink his hips, change direction. I love seeing that. I mean, if you don't love the gauntlet drill with the wide receivers, come on.
It's the best.
It's so damn good. And then just getting the wide receivers to go out and just run some routes. You can really see who can run a crisp route. Granted, there's nobody covering them, but if you can't run a crisp route with no one covering you, then I'm a little worried about your route running. But we've just seen so many of these excellent players make big plays. Yes, it's against air. It's not a big deal. But when you see CD Lamb go up and make a spinning catch on the sideline, toe tap right there at the edge of the cone, you're looking at him and you go, yep, that guy's got it. You didn't even need to look at film or stats or anything else. It took one play. And so those are the kind of things I love to see, is these guys can just show off their athleticism in a way that actually pertains to the game of football, not just the track and field stuff.
I love the GPS data we get to out of like the gauntlet, where that's something we didn't really necessarily have access to 5-6 years ago in the same abundance as we do now. Now, when we're evaluating a prospect, a guy can hit 21.5, 22 miles per hour. You get super excited. Also, I think for the combine, it shows kind of like the real world speed. A guy like Keon Coleman last year, people were down on after the 40. And then, of course, the miles per hour in the gauntlet were very impressive. Little things like that sort of, it's like gives a more complete picture. So we're definitely really, really excited about it. The running back class is unbelievably deep and very talented. This is a class where the last class you can really go back and say there's this much at the top would be 2023, where we had Gibbs and Bijan both selected inside the top 12. For overall class quality, you've got to go back to like 2017, which is the dream class, where we've had so many players make massive impacts for us in fantasy football. And generally, Alfredo, it's Ashton Genty, and then pick your RB2. The combine's going to say a lot about which running back kind of ends up in the RB2 spot, in my opinion, because the draft capital is going to matter, especially for fantasy football. So the first player we're going to talk about, Kaleb Johnson. He's absolutely in the mix. I'd say that when you speak to some analysts, they'll have him as high as RB2. And really the lowest you'll see him is RB5 by most. The two Ohio State backs and Omarion Hampton ahead of him for some. But I had Thor Nystrom on Dynasty Life the other day. He's head over heels for Kaleb Johnson. We've had Jax Falcone has come on head over heels for Kaleb Johnson. Like, there's a ton of Kaleb Johnson enthusiasm. A few things to his game. People poke holes in the fact that he's running through wide open holes on that offensive line. There's also been some question marks about his ability as a receiver. Only 22 receptions in an offense that doesn't really pass. And Kaleb Johnson, there's been a few questioning the long speed. He was the first person you put on the list that you want to talk about here. Talk about Kaleb Johnson's potential at the combine and your view of him as a prospect.
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever you have a running back who's got sort of limited production off of really one good big year like he had, you're trying to get as many pieces as you can to fill in the puzzle here, right? Like, yeah, we have the film, we get it. 6 foot, 225 pounds. This is a big boy. And while the film can look good, we want to make sure that he can actually run the way it looks on film. And so I'm not expecting him to go in there and blow up the combine with a 4.3, but if he can run in the high 4.4s, even low 4.5s, I think that's going to be a big win for him. If he shows up at 225 pounds and runs, I'm not, not necessarily an indictment, but the low 4.5s, high 4.6s, that could be a big indictment on his draft value. And you'll see a guy like him maybe go from early second to probably late second, early third, where you're just saying, okay, well, he's a thumper. And, the Iowa offense produced another NFL prospect here. So that's where I think it's going to help or hurt him the most. Typically with guys like this, you see that they either show up to the combine a little underweight, like at 218 probably for Kaleb, and he goes in there and he runs the 4.5, and that's a really successful combine for him. And I like him as a prospect. I've got him as my running back 4 behind Omarion Hampton and Trevion Henderson. I just think those guys tend to be a little bit more dynamic than him, and they've done it for a little bit longer, and that's what I like to see. But yeah, with Kaleb, I think he's a good prospect. I think that he's one of these guys that the timing and the 40-yard dash is going to affect his NFL draft stock so much when it comes to the running back spot.
What, and you think a positive number for Kaleb Johnson would be what, Alfredo?
I think a 4.5. If he comes in at a 4.54, 4.54, 4.55, I think that's going to be a positive number for him. And it's also going to be dependent on his weight. If he comes in around 220 pounds, 5 pounds less than what he's listed at, that's going to be a win for him. But if he comes in at like 215 and then still runs, high 4.5s, you're saying, okay, well, he dropped some weight, still ran at this. What's going to be his real playing weight? And that's sort of the game a lot of these prospects play. They'll show up to the combine underweight, not run, and then, they'll show up to the combine at their playing weight, not run, and then decide to run at pro days when they've dropped like 10 pounds and been working on speed for a full 3-4 weeks. So that's what we'll have to wait and see with Kaleb.
Yeah, and you have to think this year, I think these running backs know there's going to be only a finite number of landing spots that are truly premium, where I think that it's a prove it combine for some of these guys. Kaleb, that'll be very interesting with the 40. I think if he can get that sub 4.55 40, we're feeling really, really good about him, because that's one of the sort of quote unquote criticisms was the pure speed and certainly the breakaway ability. I don't see that. The guy's constantly hitting the hole. He's able to reel off tons of long runs, very productive. And then that year 2 for him, he was banged up. So we could have had a really big 2023, but again, dealt with some injuries. That freshman year, though, 800 rushing yards, Iowa record for a freshman. So Kaleb Johnson, definitely a fun one. But I'm with you. My running back 2 in this class is Omarion Hampton. He's been the one that I've been on as the RB2 for a while. I understand the Trevion Henderson enthusiasm, but when it comes to Hampton, all of the things we like about Kaleb Johnson, he possesses, but he also has a much better receiving pedigree. He had the all-time record at UNC for yards from scrimmage, over 2,000 this year, had consecutive seasons with at least 1,500 rushing yards and at least 15 touchdowns in some rare company in the ACC. Your neck of the woods, ACC country, only 4 players have done this. Lamar Jackson, Travis Etienne, Dalvin Cook, and now Omarion Hampton. So a very good fantasy pedigree with that group of players. Your thoughts on Omarion Hampton, track background? This could be a big combine for him.
Yeah, and what I love about Omarion Hampton is that we see him kind of have the pacing that a wide receiver would normally have on routes, because he does have the speed, but he's also got the size. And what you tend to see with a lot of running backs is they go one speed with everything. Let me hit the hole as hard as I can and just run over the linebackers that are in front of me, or I'm going to take things really slow and stay patient, sort of that Le'Veon Bell style that we saw for so long. What I like for him is he could do a bit of both, man. Like, this is a very, very complete back who, yeah, he can be the thumper and knock over some defenders, but he's also got that speed. And like you mentioned, he's got the ability in the receiving game as well. I saw a lot of Joe Mixon to his game, where he can hit, those outside zone runs. He can work some gap run plays right up the middle. He's got the receiving chops, man. Like, this is a guy, it kind of going to sound like a broken record, but he can do everything really well. There's not really a glaring weakness on his resume or in his pedigree here. And so I think that if he shows up to the combine and disappoints people with a bad 40, I wonder what that does to his draft stock. Because right now we're seeing mock drafts where he's going in the first round.
Yep.
Where he's going as a top 25 pick. That has me very curious, because if he goes in there and runs a 4.5, is he still a first round back? I don't know. There's people that have the philosophy you don't take a running back in the first round at all, even if they are as special as Ashton Jeanty. So I'm not sure what happens there, but these guys that are all floating in that running back 2 through 4 or 5 range, man, the combine's going to be big for them. Judkins, the other guy, and Henderson, all of them, man. The 40s and their 10-yard splits that they have are going to be huge for the running backs.
No, completely agree. I would actually be very surprised if Hampton doesn't run well. But
Oh, I'd be
again,
shocked.
there's been guys for multiple seasons where you expect them to run well, they disappoint. It happens every year. It's very hard to forecast the 40 after you get past certain players. But when it comes to Hampton, the track background, the explosiveness, the size, the athleticism, and his two-way ability, you bring up the first round. I think that his pedigree as a receiver, NFL teams are going to like that a lot. Travion Henderson's been another one sort of mocked into the first round by many, also offers you that upside at the receiving position. But when you get a guy like Hampton, you start talking about the Chargers, the Broncos, the Minnesota Vikings, Kansas City at 31. There's a few of these teams where you could see it happen where the NFL embraces what's considered to be one of the better positions in the draft. They go ahead and squeeze those guys in before the end of day one, like we saw last year with the multiple wide receivers going at the end of day one, where you just don't have to fight everybody in the second round, go up and get your guy. So I think there's a chance, even though there's been a sort of a trend of not selecting running backs, I think that there's a chance that this year we could see as many as 3 in the first round, and I think we'll get at least 2. So very exciting. One guy who I would consider to be sort of a your guy, LeQuint Allen. This is a player where, again, it's such a deep class that Allen's outside of a lot of top 10s. But when you look at the profile, he's 20 years old, very, very good season at Syracuse, led all of college football in receptions at the running back position with 64. Last year, the player who led all of college football in receptions at the running back position was Bucky Irving. Allen at the Senior Bowl also, he's was a little bit bigger than I would have anticipated in terms of he's kind of built like a wide receiver. He's got a long wingspan, catches the ball very fluidly. Your thoughts on him and what you're expecting to see in Indianapolis?
Yeah, man, I really love LeQuint Allen, and what you said is exactly right. The way he's built looks like a wide receiver. He kind of looks. My co-host Dave Kluge said that he's built like Ozempic Derrick Henry, where it's just he's got that high cut build, the long legs, but he's a lot thinner. Like LeQuint Allen, if he weighs in at 205. That's going to be him gaining weight. And so I love LeQuint Allen. I think he's a really smooth runner. He doesn't make a lot of those sudden cuts and jukes, but he sees the hole really well. He catches the ball as well as any receiver in this class, if I'm being totally honest. And at Syracuse, it's not like he was working behind some powerhouse offensive line. Like he was the offense. And so 2 years back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, he's still young, like you mentioned, 20 years old. If he can go out there and weigh in 205, 210, go and run the 4.4 40 that we want out of a running back. He's got all the production I like. I like his film. And I think we kind of have to get it out of our mind. I know there's the Kaleb Johnsons and Omarion Hamptons and Ashton Jeantys of the world that we feel like they can handle all 3 downs. Running backs are all in some sort of a rotation in the NFL, no matter how good you are. There's very few workhorse backs. So give me the guy who's going to get on for 30, 40% of the snaps on passing downs because he can pass block well, he can catch well, and he can run when it's needed. So yeah, I really love LeQuint Allen.
Yeah, and that game against Miami, if anybody's kind of learning about these prospects for the first time, Allen also had the phenomenal performance against Miami. That was Syracuse's biggest win in quite some time. Had 143 combined yards, and it was like 60 receiving yards against Miami. And then he followed it up with a massive bowl performance and an okay week at the Senior Bowl. So I think for me, he's been a difficult one to rank just because it's not I don't like him. It's the fact that there's so many more kind of complete backs ahead of him, but I am being open-minded with Allen. I think the draft capital, the combine is going to matter for a player of his age and also with the guys sort of he's competing with for draft capital. But Allen, if some team falls in love with him as a receiver, he might land a lot better than he's being projected in some of these NFL mock drafts, let alone the ones we're doing for fantasy football. One running back who is becoming like, he's like a meme. Dave Kluge, I don't even know what he's saying about Cam Skattebo, because his LeQuint Allen, Derrick Henry, Ozempic Derrick Henry was like the greatest thing I've ever heard. But Cam Skattebo's one where like you just say the name Cam Skattebo and it evokes a strong response one way or another from people. I had Dwayne McFarland on. His model is very, very high on Cam Skattebo. There's some people saying this is a James Conner-like player, a David Montgomery-like player. He forced 100 missed tackles last year at Arizona State. Of course, had the phenomenal game against Texas when people finally got to see him play, and was like a kind of a cult figure in that game where he had a touchdown pass. He's catching passes. Just incredible production profile at Arizona State. Started out at Sacramento State, worked his way up to sort of the bigger conference. Skattebo, though, you say his name to people, and some people are like, that's the guy. That guy's a second-round pick. He's a starting running back in the NFL. There's other people, you say his name, they say he's going to be a 4-7 guy. And this guy is a day 3 guy, and it doesn't get people excited. So, like, where are you at? Is it a little bit of both? Is it you're excited about him? Like, where are you at on Skattebo?
This is not going to be cool to say, but I'm somewhere in between. I really am. Like, I don't see him as this guy that's going to be, taken in the second round and be an NFL starter immediately like that. But I see him as someone who, listen, a team is going to draft him to be the battering ram because that's what he does. Whether he's pass blocking or running, my dude just puts his head down and just tries to kill anyone that is in front of him. And I think that's why so many people like him. He's just a fun watch, man. You put on the tape, he's so fun to watch. Like, he wakes up and chooses violence. He goes after every single defender. And honestly, to me, like, sometimes that is the knock, is that he'll actually go out of his way to try and just knock someone out instead of taking the smarter yards that might be 3 or 4 yards in the other direction, So, like, I'm not saying he doesn't have the fluidity and the movements, because he does to an extent. I think the athleticism will be a little limited. I think he's going to have a very specific role in the NFL, but he very much fits the mold of one of these guys that he'll be a 1B in a backfield. And if that 1A gets injured, he could be huge for fantasy, where he's going to have, 4 or 5 straight weeks of here's 25 touches. Let's just get you touchdown after touchdown after touchdown. I mean, we just like you said, you mentioned James Conner. We saw that with him, and he never let go of the reins of being a starting running back in the NFL. So Skattebo can do that, but I want to see that he's a better pass blocker. That's where he really struggled. So I know he caught a lot of passes, but I don't think he's going to find himself working on a lot of passing downs in the NFL. And that's going to be one of those things where you can run over everybody in college, man. The NFL is going to be a little bit different. So if you can't run over everybody in the NFL and you can't run past them in the NFL and you're struggling with blocking, I want to see what is it that he's going to do that's going to get him on the field more.
And you hit on a number of really strong points. I think for me at the combine, Cam Skattebo, with that, the way he plays, the physicality, I want to see 220. If Cam Skattebo comes in like a 215, 214, I don't think that's a win for him, especially with the kind of comparisons he's getting, where I've actually heard some Arizona people, like sports media down there, sort of like kind of chill with the James Conner talk, because he's just not that big. He's physically like a thick back, but he's not that size of a back. And I also think with Skattebo is the 4.6'5", 4.6. What are we looking at here, Alfredo? Like, for me, it's like he can't be super slow, and it's got to be a little bit of a balance here, because the skills are really good. And I'm not sure. I think that with the pass catching, was that like an indictment to Arizona State's lack of weapons? They're trying to get him the ball anyway. I think maybe, but there's certain teams that are going to look at him as having some pass catching utility. Tyler Algier rookie year with a little bit more pass catching ability, or Ray Garvin's comp where it's like kind of peak Rex Burkhead where he's a Swiss Army knife. I think this is one where multiple teams might look at him differently, but certainly the combine's going to be a big one. Last year we talked about Bucky Irving. Disappointing combine, unbelievable rookie season. Irving was fantastic, but ran a step slower at the combine. Troy Franklin also ran a step slower at the combine. So this was sort of like a Oregon skill position players not necessarily testing well. This year they have 2 chances to kind of get it right. Talk about Jordan James at the running back position first.
Yeah, man, this is a dude that when I put on the film, I really like his run style. I think you want to see him finish a few more runs, but I like that he's very self-aware. He's like, I'm 5'10", I'm 210 pounds. I'm not trying to be the thumper that's finishing runs and knocking dudes out. He does a great job of getting through arm tackles. He doesn't break a lot of the big tackles, but he will get to the arm tackles, and he keeps his contact balance as he's running. What I want to see with him at his size is, you mentioned Bucky Irving. Another guy that I hear mentioned with him a lot and comped with him is Kyron Williams, because he's got that similar size, the similar skill set. This is the kind of prospect that we see. If he goes to the combine and runs like a surprising, and I'm not suggesting he would do this, but like has a surprisingly slow 4.65, 4.7, something crazy like that. This is a guy that drops from being a 3rd or 4th round pick to round 7 undrafted free agent. And this is what, there's going to be that group of guys, especially like Jordan James, I would say Woody Marks, Trevor Etienne, DJ Giddens. Like, there's going to be a bunch of these guys that are in the later ranks, probably mid-round to late picks, that if their combine is just bad, they might drop out of the draft altogether, because there are so many of these guys that teams are just going to be like, we have a type. We have a type. We only like to date this type, and that's what we want. We want either the really fast guy or the guy who's going to knock the crap out of people like Skattebo, and that's what we're going to go with. But Jordan James, he's got the tools where he can do it all. And if he runs well, I think he could potentially go as high as like round 3. I don't think he's a bad player at all.
Very, very interesting. And when we talk about Oregon Ducks, let's talk about Tez Johnson to start out our wide receiver discussion. Tez Johnson absolutely ripped up the Senior Bowl, unguardable, moved differently. It was like the talk of day 1, backed it up on day 2, day 3, but he also weighs like 155 pounds. Like, Tez Johnson is super small, but he's incredibly quick, and we anticipate him to have a very, very fast 40. How fast are we looking for here, Alfredo, with this size?
I mean, dude, if you come to the combine weighing 155, 160 pounds, you better blow everybody away with a 4.3. And that's like, we have to see that. And not only do we have to see that in the 40, but we're going to have to see that you can jump out of the stadium. We've got to see that you can change direction really well through all these drills, which we know that he can based on his route running abilities. Don't drop a single ball through the gauntlet. Like, it's unfortunate, but a guy like him who's going to be a lot smaller, he's going to have to do everything perfect, because teams that have types are already looking for any excuse to just remove him from their draft board, which I think would be crazy, because Tez Johnson is a really, really good player. I know there's been a lot of like the Tank Dell comps, and that kind of worries me, because yeah, they're similar players, but Tank Dell's also getting injured a lot. And I think teams are starting to notice that. Like, it was the small boy season where we were getting in these little skinny slot receivers and everyone was producing and everything was great. Now they've started to get hurt, and the tune is sort of changing. So Tez Johnson, listen, if he was 185 pounds, I think he's potentially a top 5 or 6 receiver in this draft, because he's that damn good. But weighing it at 156 pounds, man, it's going to kill him. So if he can be at the 165 weight range, run a 4.3, I think there's going to be a team that finds a spot for him potentially on day 2.
Yeah, so I think he's day 2 pick despite the size. And I think, like, when we look at Dell, glass half empty view is he can't stay healthy. Glass half full is when he's been on an NFL field, he's been very, very effective. Terrific as a rookie, etc. So for me, Tez Johnson, like, another thing is, anytime of late we've seen a player sort of rip up a Senior Bowl, it's been reflected in their draft capital. So I think there's a lot of positive momentum with Tez. Certainly he does need to back it up with the measurables. Like you said, the 40 needs to be fast. I think it's going to be fast, though. Like, the way he moves, it's just, I can't see this guy running a slow 40. I don't think what we saw happen with like Troy Franklin is going to happen with Tez here. And the production was excellent. Actually had more catches than Franklin, back-to-back 80-plus catch seasons for the Ducks. So I'm into Tez. Slot usage, and he also offers teams something as a returner. So he's interesting. Let's talk about another player that needs to be really, really fast, because Isaiah Bond, I think, is going to have the fastest 40 of any of the wide receivers at the combine. Saw it last year with Xavier Worthy, Texas Longhorns. Isaiah Bond transfers from Alabama to Texas. Had a disappointing year. Also was banged up a little bit this year. Matthew Golden might get drafted ahead of him now. But Bond has a chance to regain a lot of momentum. We saw it last year with Worthy and also with Adonai Mitchell running really well. How fast is Bond going to be?
I think he's got to be 4.3. He's got to be. And just seeing him on film reminded me so much of Jalen Waddle, the way he moves, the way he runs his routes, the way he's able to just beat every single corner off the line. Now, is he inconsistent? Yeah. Does he need to refine the way he's running these routes? Yeah. I think what a lot of people saw was that when more and more people started to pay attention to college football later on in the season, he had that nagging ankle injury. And so all you're seeing is a guy who wasn't able to get open as often. He had a few concentration drops on a big stage, but that's not par for the course with his career. He had like 4 drops over 2 years. This is not a guy who has a hands issue. And then you get at the same time the simultaneous rise of Matthew Golden having his big game. So you get a guy who you get the big drop on national TV in the national championship. You get the injury where we're forgetting about you. And then you have your teammate Matthew Golden having these big games. Well, yeah, everyone's sort of forgotten about Isaiah Bond, but he's not just some run-of-the-mill speedster. This is a guy who led Alabama in receiving. He was leading Texas in receiving through his first 5 games until he got hurt in that Oklahoma game, the Red River Shootout. And then everything changed for him in his season. So this is a guy that I think that if scouts, GMs have been watching, have been tracking him over the career, and they acknowledge the injury thing and they look at the time that he could have, 4.3, potentially even better at the combine, yeah, he could be one of those guys that maybe sneaks into the late first. Right now, I think he's probably going the first half of the early second round, but late first is probably not out of the question if he runs a Xavier Worthy type time for the 40.
Yeah, and I think you hit it. I think this could be like a 4.28, 4.29 type guy, sub 4.3,
Yep.
lightning fast. And we go back to Alabama, certainly the Jamison Williams, the Jalen Waddles, these speed wide receivers. Then you factor in the Texas. So it's been sort of a shift from like the super fast guys at Alabama. Now we're seeing super fast guys come out of Texas. Isaiah Bond and Golden should run well. He's got a track background. Not like he'll be 4.4-ish. Isaiah Bond, though, this is like kind of why we have the combine. It's sort of like a sobering reminder for us in fantasy football that we might have guys like Jaylin Noel ranked ahead of Isaiah Bond in like fantasy football. Like I know certainly I do at this point, but if Bond does what he's going to do, your chances of hitting as a first round draft pick wide receiver versus a guy who's going at like pick 50 and on, it goes up dramatically. So for me, like Isaiah Bond is definitely one to watch at the combine, if not the one to watch at the combine. You bring up first round, you could see him landing in Washington. You could see him landing in Houston. You could see the Buffalo Bills taking him. Pittsburgh, he'd fit in well if he is this fast. So Bond, like it's sort of an Isaiah Bond correction in terms of fantasy rankings at the combine. You could see it. Jalen Royals, another player who dealt with injuries this past year. We've had back-to-back drafts, Alfredo, where a G5 guy went on day 2. This has been Rashee Rice 2 years ago when SMU was in the American. Last year with Malachi Corley. This year, it looks like it could be Jalen Royals, a player that is built sort of like a running back. He's like 5'11". He's 205 plus, but he's very well built. I had a chance to talk to him down at the Senior Bowl. Told me he was playing at 80% at the Senior Bowl, had that foot injury this year. But when he was on the field this year, he had a 200-yard game against Boise State, absolutely shredded UNLV. Last year, 15 touchdown grabs. You're a wide receiver guy, Alfredo. Your thoughts on Jalen Royals, how he projects for you as a pro prospect?
I mean, this is a dude that was on pace to absolutely crush this year statistically. He was on pace to have over 1,200 yards after having a 1,000-yard season last season with 15 touchdowns. What I like about Jalen Royals is that, yeah, he may not be big, but what we find with some of these smaller wide receivers is that if they get touched by a defensive back, that's it. It's over. For him, he's really strong. He's sturdy. He's thickly built. So for him to run through his release off the line, through his routes, catch through contact, he's really, really good at it. And that's what you want out of a guy. Like, I know he lined up on the outside a lot at Utah State. I think in the NFL, he's probably going to find his home as like I don't want to keep saying this term, but power slot, probably just the slot guy in the NFL, because that's going to be the best move for him, is the way he catches through contact, the way he's able to shed defenders. I comped him to Jayden Reed because I think he has similar athleticism to him, and he's just an absolute yak machine. He's sixth in this class, and he's one of these guys that I think you can line him up in the backfield, you can line him up out wide, you can line him up in the slot, and no matter what, he's going to be a value to you. It's not like a Malachi Corley maybe from last season, where you got to worry about his route running and what can he actually do. Jalen Royals has that stuff on lock. He's good to go. So yes, I do think that he's going to be a second round guy. I've even seen some mocks. One of my former coworkers over at Football Guys, he's now at the Draft Network, Daniel Harms. He mocked Jalen Royals to the Rams at pick 26, and that's not out of the question. So I think there's a lot of these guys that, depending on what happens to the combine, depending on what teams need in free agency, because like you mentioned, it's not a great free agency class. So Jalen Royals could go as high into the top 30s, but I also think that he's probably more likely to go early second round.
Jalen Royals is sort of like a Deontay Johnson Pittsburgh kind of player for me, where he's a killer route runner and he can crush you underneath. And like you said, this was a guy averaging 120 yards per game this season before he went down with an injury. So Royals is definitely an interesting one. Also, we want to see him run well because at the Senior Bowl, I just was lacking a step, but very, very impressive in the one-on-ones in terms of his route running ability, a real killer. So interested in Royals. And you put this one on here, Alfredo, and I don't even know why we're doing this because I'm already depressed. Travis Hunter is going to the combine as a cornerback. I was like one of the irrational ones holding out hope that we were going to have him come out and say, I want to play wide receiver in the league because, wide receivers are getting paid more than cornerbacks. It's easier to get a $20 million. Yeah, like, what are we doing here? But you want to talk about Travis Hunter. What do you want to see at the combine? You want to see him in wide receiver drills?
I'd love to see him in wide receiver drills. And he's actually said that he will do wide receiver drills, and teams are going to ask him to do that stuff. So I know he's going there registered as a cornerback, and that broke my heart as well. I keep hearing the same thing. It's that you get him on the field as a corner, he takes away a third or a half of the field, whatever you want to say, and then you can bring him on to offense for a few snaps here and there. The whole thing is that if you bring him on to offense for a few snaps here and there, he's really never going to be fantasy relevant. And because you're looking at a guy that's maybe getting 4 targets a game. Now, I'm not trying to wish cast him into wide receiver, but I think he's a better wide receiver than he is cornerback at this spot in his career. I think he's the best wide receiver in this draft class. And I would still think that he is a top 3 or 4 pick, no matter what position he decides on. And listen, to me, the ultimate dream for fantasy would be to see Travis Hunter go 4th overall to the New England Patriots, and they list him as a wide receiver. And you've got Drake May and Travis Hunter together for as many years as we can, him getting peppered with targets in this Josh McDaniels offense. Give it to me all day. I want to see Travis Hunter as a wide receiver. I know he's great. I know he's going to test off the charts. I know he's going to be an awesome corner. But like you said, the money's at wide receiver. I think his skill set is better at wide receiver. This is just so unprecedented. And I'm actually a little worried it might start a trend of other guys that are, so unique, have these strong skill sets that want to try to do both. We see it happen with coaches and GMs all the time. I'd be curious to see if it happens with players.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is one in the NFL when we're talking about like rule breakers, and Travis Hunter could be that. And I really hope it doesn't, because I don't want my offensive guys on my fantasy team anywhere near the defensive side of the ball, even in special situations. But yeah, I think Travis Hunter, if he was a wide receiver, we would be looking at him as a player that is truly elite, would be up there, not Ashton Genty, but he's in the conversation for me with Ted McMillan for the top wide receiver. And also, Alfredo, he was able to have this sort of wide receiver production while playing every single snap, a challenge that no other wide receiver had to deal with over the last 10 years when we're evaluating these elite prospects. I would love it.
His ball skills are some of the best that I've seen on a play. Like, it reminded me so much of what we saw last season with Malik Neighbors and some of these other really good wide receivers. His ball skills are incredible. His ability to contort his body, find the open space, and go get the ball. And I think that's why so many GMs and just even scouts in general see him as so valuable at corner, because he can change the game by getting these interceptions, by putting himself in the right spot. So I get it. I really do. I think, like you said, the money's better at wide receiver. I think the skill's better at wide receiver.
Garrett Wilson, like player.
That's
Travis
my
Hunter,
comp.
so, oh, yeah,
That's my player comp.
Love that. Love that. Let's take it over the tight end spot. Let's go your neck of the woods. Elijah Arroyo was unbelievable at the Senior Bowl. Next level type athlete, completely shredding the opposing secondary in both one-on-one drills and also the 11-on-11s. He was so good through 2 days that some people were like, Royal should just go home. Mario Cristobal talked about him, about how this is like a player that we're looking at as the next big Miami tight end, evoked names like Greg Olsen, like Jimmy Graham. And when Arroyo talked, he said he kind of compared his game to Laporta. He likes watching Laporta and Isaiah Likely, which I thought was really good to hear a guy talking about like that sort of route running. The production, though, at Miami was not great. You had two wide receivers besides Xavier Restrepo get 50 receptions. You had two running backs, Damian Martinez and his backup, both getting a decent amount of production. And Arroyo, the production wasn't there. So I'm getting in all these arguments with people about you're too high on Arroyo because look at all these metrics we use for fantasy and his total stats, and he only did it for 1 year. Your thoughts on these people? How good is Arroyo? What is he going to do at the combine? He might rip it up, Alfredo.
Yeah, man. I think he really could. I think he could rip it up. Like, I won't be surprised to see him go run a 4.5, 4.6 at his size, 245 pounds. Like, it would not surprise me at all. You mentioned the Senior Bowl thing. The Senior Bowl and his film. He's just so fluid. And the University of Miami, they used him like a wide receiver in so many ways. You don't see teams targeting their tight end downfield like this. This was really impressive, the way that they used Arroyo. And, man, I'll say this. I went to FIU, where Mario Cristobal first coached. I've seen how he uses his players. It's not always the best. So I'm not going to fault Elijah Arroyo for that. Our only special guy that we had coming at FIU was T.Y. Hilton, and they just had to funnel him the ball. But other than that, listen, it's very different nowadays because of the transfer portal and because you've got so many players that are just changing teams left and right. I mean, Brashard Smith, running back for SMU, was a wide receiver at the University of Miami the year before. These guys are not only just changing schools, they're changing positions. So Elijah Arroyo only having the one season of productivity doesn't bother me as much. I think we do have to change the way we look at traditional data points in fantasy football, because the game itself has changed. When positions are changing, height, weight, speed is changing, and then the conditions and how these players are allowed to change schools and coaches are leaving all the time. We have to be able to adjust and give context to these data sets. And that's where I'm at with Elijah Arroyo. I think he's a second-round player in the NFL draft. I think someone is going to absolutely fall in love with him and want to use him the same way that Miami used Jonnu Smith this year, and have him working all over the field and be one of those guys that can just bully bully safeties and beat linebackers with his speed. I really like Arroyo.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. I moved him up to tight end 3 in my rankings. And I think that he's got a chance that he rips up the combine. You start talking about him as a top 40 pick. He might already be there, Alfredo, after that Senior Bowl. I mean, he's a really, really impressive prospect. One more tight end to discuss, Mason Taylor. Jason Taylor's son. This was another player who had a strong Senior Bowl, and this is a player that a lot of people are pointing out as a lack of production guy, despite playing at LSU around all these NFL talented players like Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, etc. They're still sort of holding that against Taylor. He's 6'4.5", he's 255 pounds, an absolute unit. How do you think he's going to do at the combine?
So I think the expectation is going to be different for Mason Taylor. I don't think anyone was expecting him to go in there and run a 4.5, even a 4.6. Like, if he runs a 4.6, I think that's him blowing the doors off the combine. And NFL scouts are going to be in love with a guy at his size, his blocking ability, his soft hands. If he can go and run a 4.6, all bets are off. He could be a first rounder at that point. And that's saying something. He's got the pedigree. Coaches and GMs love that. They love the guys with the pedigree because they know that they've got the football mindset. They know what it takes to win. They've got the work ethic, all those fun things that people love to put out there. With Mason Taylor, I think it's just we got to keep our expectations as to what he is. He is a very good, complete tight end. I think 10 years ago, this is the ideal tight end coming into the NFL. I think for today's game, it's a little bit different. And as much as I like Mason Taylor as a prospect and as a player, I think there's going to be some teams that are going to want to use him to block a little bit more than maybe catch the ball. And I really like him. Now, I waffle back and forth between Mason Taylor and Harold Fannin at my tight end 4 because they're very different players. I think that Taylor's going to be able to be on the field all the time. And that's where I look at it for him. My struggle with Taylor is, can he be a guy that makes something happen after he catches the ball? That's so big for tight ends. Can he get that yak? I don't know that he's going to reach all of the athletic thresholds we like for tight ends. I know I was just saying that data needs context. Tight end has been pretty much like solid. You have to reach XYZ athletic thresholds to be a good fantasy tight end in the NFL. And if you don't, you're usually not good for fantasy football. And so that's where I get a little bit worried with Mason Taylor. I don't know that he's going to reach all of the speed thresholds that we want to see athletically.
Let's go lightning round. I agree. Mason Taylor is one that I think will be a starting tight end in the NFL, but not necessarily one that's going to be hugely impactful for us in fantasy. Now, when we talk about a guy who could be hugely impactful for fantasy, lightning round, Harold Fannin Jr., 238 pounds at the Senior Bowl, unbelievable production, had the most catches, the most receiving yards ever by a tight end in college, completely tore to shreds Penn State and Texas A&M, his 2 highest profile opponents this year. What does Harold Fannin need to run in the 40 at 238 pounds for you to be comfortable about this profile? Or is that a little bit overrated and it's sort of a landing spot thing for you with Fannin?
It's going to be both. It's definitely going to be landing spot is going to matter. Can they use him in a creative way? I know he gives a lot of effort when blocking. Don't have him do that. Just move him all over the field. Like I said before with Jonnu Smith or Isaiah Likely, get him to do that. In the combine, I'd love to see him. If he can run a 4.5, I'm happy with that. I'd want to see a little faster, but if he can run a 4.5, I'm happy with that. We know what he can do on the field. I'm not overly worried about that.
Yeah, 4.5 would be a really nice number for Harold Fannin Jr., and we'd get super excited about it, I think. This is one where he's a move tight end. You don't have to worry about the same things with Mason Taylor, but you need to have him be physical enough to hold up that you can use him on a high percentage of snaps. That's going to matter for him in fantasy. Devin Neal, this is a guy who came in at 220 at the Senior Bowl. There's some rumors out there, Alfredo, that Neal's going to run a very, very fast 40. Big time production, pass catching ability. What are your expectations for him athletically?
Athletically, it's not that. It's not the super fast 40. I mean, he weighed in 220 pounds at the Senior Bowl, and boy, like his film is good. Don't get me wrong, the film is good. I don't see a burner. I think that a lot of this stuff, it's funny how these rumors start to swell up. Hearing Devin Neal talk about himself, he comped himself to Alvin Kamara. And I was like, bro, is your mirror broken? Like, what are we doing? You're 220 pounds. You should be running over. You're not Alvin Kamara. And I wonder, like, how much of this is the player saying it himself and then the agent getting that out there and just getting this news. You guys watch. I'm going to run the 4.4. And it's like, probably not, brother. I don't know that I see the elite speed from Devin Neal on film. If he runs 4.5, cool. That's about what I expect.
Yeah, I mean, 220. It'll be also interesting to see what he shows up at the combine weighing to see if that's like a fluid weight.
I think that's what he does.
Sort of sticks. Yeah, I think he sticks at 220. He's one where fantasy football managers really want him to get that draft capital. He's a player like sort of in fantasy where if he gets the necessary draft capital, you brought up the Kamara thing. A lot of fantasy managers are on that. We've seen the some people on the Joe Mixon. There's all sorts of different projections and comps with him, but he is a player where there's a lot of enthusiasm in fantasy football. Another player where I really like is RJ Harvey. This is a player where I think he might have a very strong combine, two-way ability, former quarterback, had 2 huge years of production at UCF, can also catch the football. Your thoughts, quick thoughts on RJ Harvey.
This is a guy where I saw speed, man. Like the way he runs, it's a little frantic, but the way he runs, it looks like you're looking at a Booby Miles highlight reel, man. I love the way he moves out in open space. I know that maybe the size is probably about similar. He reminded me a lot of Tajay Spears when I would watch his tape coming out of Tulane. And that's what I see for him. He'll probably be a good 1B in someone's offense, and he'll be one of those guys we get frustrated about because, oh, he can do so much more. But RJ Harvey, I think he's a great athlete, and I think he'll probably show that at the combine if he runs.
Yeah, I'm into Harvey, and I keep trying to move him up and up. I want to be heavily exposed to him in both Dynasty and in best ball. I think there's big time outcomes. I actually think
Yeah.
that the enthusiasm for Skattebo, there should be similar for Harvey. I think Harvey's sort of in that range where I think he's got big fantasy potential.
I
The
have
pass
Harvey ahead
catch-
of Skattebo.
and I think that's how the market should be. Like right now in underdog, you have to take Skattebo as like running back 38. Harvey's down there in like the depths and depths. So I have so much RJ Harvey right now, and I'm like, this should be reflected in everything I do dynasty wise, let alone redraft and best ball. So I'm big into Harvey. I think this is a guy who will run quickly, like you said. He's short, but he's very, very like well built. Looks like sprinter type guy. So I think this could be a blazing fast 40, reflective to his BMI, and I think that'll be a good one. Quick thoughts on Jaylin Noel. Had a great Senior Bowl.
Yeah, Jaylen Noel, he's one of these guys that when I first started watching him on film, I liked him better than his partner Jayden Higgins over at Iowa State. And with him, I think that he's got to refine himself as a route runner. I want to see him get a little bit better as a route runner. He's naturally got to fight being smaller. So he's got the small catch radius. What I think he's good at right now is his pacing. He can accelerate and decelerate really well through his routes. What I want to see is better footwork from him and then fighting through traffic, because he's going to be one of these guys that you don't want him to turn into a gadget guy at the NFL. And that's what we don't want to see at his, I know he's thickly built, but at his size with the small catch radius, with the speed, you don't want to see him turn into the gadget guy. And I think that if he can refine the route running, get a little bit stronger through contact, I think he's good.
Yeah, and I think that he's going to get a pretty high draft capital after the Senior Bowl. I love the way you put that, where we want to see Noel end up on a team. I'd love to see him just put in the slot as a rookie and do his thing. I think he's versatile. I think he can make plays downfield. He had a number of like big touchdowns over 50 yards at Iowa State. Definitely a big playability. So I'm very much into Jaylen Noel. I have him pretty highly ranked in my own rankings. But his teammate, Jayden Higgins, let's talk about him. Higgins has a very good size. He was 6'3" and a half. He weighed over 210 pounds at the Senior Bowl. Sort of a Cortland Sutton-ish build to him.
I like that.
Your thoughts on Higgins, what you're looking for athletically?
Yeah, he's a great value Drake London, I think, here, the Walmart brand. Like, he's a basketball player. He's got the massive wingspan, over 6'7", and he runs his routes like a basketball player. Very smooth. There's not a lot of sudden change of direction. There's not a lot of dropping of the hips. So corners really aren't guessing where he's going. It's just a matter of, I've got the long wingspan, so I can go pluck the ball out of the air, and I'm bigger than you. So I will win. He's got these soft hands, good body control. He wins in the contested catches. He doesn't necessarily have the speed to win vertically. And so this is where I think he's one of these guys that he might disappoint people at the combine. I think we might see Jayden Higgins go out there and run in the 4.5s, maybe even high 4.5s. He's a strider, so he's one of those guys, like, he might be able to catch up as he gains speed going in that 40, and we're going to see him get really fast at like the 30-yard mark. But for the first 20, 25 yards, it's going to take a little bit of giddy up for him. And so I do worry about that. I wonder if he maybe sits out of this 40 and waits for the pro day.
Shout out Dave Kluge. Walmart Drake London was pretty good. I don't think it's Ozempic Derrick Henry, but it's pretty good. Alfredo, that was a good one. And you're hearing it here on press coverage first, but Bhayshul Tuten's going to rip up the combine. There's a lot of steam for that. This is a player where there's rumors that the athletic testing numbers are going to be exceptional. Virginia Tech back. Right now, this is a guy that's projected to be a day 3 pick. Let's say he has an exceptional combine. What does that sort of do for you with his profile? Any thoughts on him as a player, Alfredo?
I think with any of these guys that you don't have very highly ranked, when they go and they have a big time combine, you go back to the film and you say, what did I miss? Like, where does this speed come into play on the film? Because I see that he's fast, but it wasn't on my radar that he's going to go and just absolutely destroy the combine and kill it out there. So hearing that there's buzz, like first round buzz of Bhayshul Tuten.
No. We're not on the first round Tuten. There was one person, will remain nameless, had him projecting the first.
But
we'll
even let's say even day 2, like I wasn't there. So if anyone goes and has a big combine or anything like that, and the buzz starts to build, you have to go back to the film. You have to go back to the numbers. You have to go back to looking at this and say, what did I miss? And so I see that he's got the acceleration. He's a tough runner. He's got the good vision. There was nothing that stood out as remarkable to me. And I think there's a lot of those fine guys. You're going to hear me say that word a lot throughout this process. There's a lot of, once you get to like running back 12 through 25, they're all about fine. There's not much difference between those guys. So you can see them all interchange.
100%. This was a lot of fun. Again, the combine right around the corner. Let's see how these guys do. And we'll see if there's another player that emerges. Alfredo, let us know where everybody can find your work.
Yeah, I'm over at Football Guys. We've got the Football Guys Rookie Draft Guide out now. Version 1 is out with, over 140 players in there. Now we're going to be adding more as we bring out our version 2 after the NFL Combine. And you can check out my work over on the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, where I host that with Dave Kluge, on YouTube at Football Guys Fantasy, and then on Twitter and X and all the social medias out there at Alfredo A. Brown.
And spoiler alert, Dave Kluge might be on a press coverage or Dynasty Life sometime in the next week or so as well. You guys crush it over there. Yeah, definitely. Alfredo sees that. It's immediate delete in his downloads. Stick with us here at Press Coverage. Also, check out my recent episodes of Dynasty Life, getting you ready to crush your leagues this season, getting you ready to learn everything you need to know about this rookie class. We will see you soon.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.